Hello there, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are going to wait a few minutes to get started so that our participants can queue into the room. So we'll be back momentarily. We can see everybody starting to fill in. Thank you for joining us. We still have people queuing in regularly, so we'll wait a few more moments. All right. I think we can get started. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us. Thank you for queuing into the room. And we're going to get started. So we're going to do some quick intros. And first, I'll start out just a little bit. I'm Bari Norman. I'm the head counselor at Expert Admissions. And I am here with my colleague, Sarah Lyons, who will be co-presenting with me this evening. We know this is a topic that a lot of people wanted to hear about. I think it's the thing we get asked the most about. Tell us how things have changed this year, what's going on. We're here to talk about all of it tonight. So as I said, I'm Bari Norman, head counselor at Expert Admissions, and I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Sarah Lyons, who can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. Thank you for joining us this evening. As Bari said, I'm a senior admissions counselor at Expert Admissions. And prior to working at Expert Admissions, I've worked in admissions at the University of Chicago and then also Carnegie Mellon. We're going to look backwards, and we're going to start with a backwards in just the last application cycle. So we will go a little bit further back to give you some data in terms of how things have changed over the last up to about 30 years. But let's start just with this 2021-2022 cycle. There are a lot of changes, and one of the most important and major changes we saw is, of course, the increase in applications at specifically the larger public institutions. So schools like Maryland had a 9% increase in applications. Michigan had over 84,000 apps and a 6% increase. Miami had just under 11% increase in applications. UNC had a 6.5% increase. UVA increased their applications from 6%. UVM saw a 19% application this year, and the year before that was 38%. So that has grown tremendously in the last couple of years. The University of Washington is just over 7%. And while we couldn't find data for the 2021 to 2022 application season for Wisconsin, in the year prior to that, they had a 17% application increase. So really, there's a huge notable change in these public institutions. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is happening and how that's trickling down into some of the more highly selective changes as well. So at some of these, some of the more highly selective schools, you'll see that not only are the application numbers up, but the admit rates have really gone down pretty dramatically and drastically at some places. Some of the more noteworthy shifts are the schools that we just talked about, like Wisconsin and Maryland and UVM, but also some of the private schools like Tulane and Miami and Northeastern. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we think that might be happening. But you can see that on this chart on the left-hand side, the Ivy and some of the other really highly selectives have a less significant downward slope because they've always, in the last 10 years at least, had a single-digit admit rate. But really what I want to point out is the dramatic decrease and almost a straight downward line for the schools on the right-hand side of the graph. So since 2012 in blue all the way to 2022, this last cycle in green, you can see that there is this really strict tightening of the belt with a significant downward slope in the admit rates for a lot of these schools. And so it really is much more significant at the schools that in the past have been traditionally much more straightforward and predictable in how in their admissions policies and practices. And it's causing us to really have a significant reorientation for how we're looking at these types of schools and advising on where students should be applying. So you'll see with every single instance on this chart, with the exception of Middlebury in 2020, there has been that like straight diagonal downward line, some very, very steep like Michigan and NYU and Miami. And really it's just, it's pretty, I think, striking what it's looked like in the last 10 years. And so I'll show you another graph as well that is a little bit more digestible with fewer schools on there. And these schools all, there's a pretty wide range of schools on this list. And like I said, it's a bit more digestible with less schools and a smaller sampling. But you can see here that the admit rates are also getting much smaller in really meaningful and significant ways. Traditionally, some of the target schools or safer options that we would have advised would, or we would have predicted would have come through for our students aren't coming through in the same ways. And so it's more important now than ever to really think about and be strategic at the top end schools that students are applying to, and think about, the overall risk and think about overall strategy of where you're applying and where you'll be using your early decision blue chip versus early action and regular decision. What are
Sarah,
the...
Can I add one thing I just wanted to say? Is just in adding to what Sarah is saying is that, you can see here, since we're looking at a smaller group of schools, when you look at particularly Harvard and Yale, sort of upper end of the Ivies, you can really see it's much more compact what's happened. And so while we felt that belt tightening there, it doesn't feel as stark as the shifts that we've seen at the schools where you see sort of the steeper decline. And so like Sarah was saying, places that just did admissions more straightforwardly, where you could say, listen, there's no guarantee, but at this school, if you're up a certain level or higher, you can pretty much bank on it, that those days are basically over. And that sort of that calibration of a safety school, or what we call safer option, and we're probably going to start changing our terminology a little bit, is that it shifted really. Like there have been schools that have played games for a long time, but now again, we're having fewer and fewer places that have that more straightforward admissions process, which impacts people on the higher end. People don't think of that because they're not taking a good number of the kids who they know are using them as backups. And then it's also impacting the students that are very much in range that would typically be a pretty straightforward admit. And when I say in prior years, I mean like last year and the year before. And so I just wanted to add that and just sort of like reiterate that point, because I think it's an important one that you made, Sarah.
Thank you, Bari. And so I think to Bari's point, what are the causes for this? And we'll talk a little bit more about this throughout the night. Of course, there's kind of that yield protection, which Bari was alluding to a little bit, where we have seen that historically in schools like Michigan, where they might postpone the really high flying students to see if they stick around for regular decision. And it seems as though some of the other schools are now starting to operate in a similar vein. We saw that at schools like Wisconsin and Maryland this year. And of course, Tulane has been very upfront about their policies and, demonstrating that interest in applying early decision, and that really being the best way to demonstrate that you will be attending. And colleges have seemingly just really been much more protective over their yield, which isn't a huge surprise, but it's just a lot more apparent now. And then of course, with the yield protection, the test optional component is a huge piece. It causes students to really cast a much wider net, and they're applying to a lot more schools. So those application numbers are going up, which allows for colleges to really be flexible and to admit the exact class that they want to admit. Not to mention they still have to meet all of their institutional priorities. So there's a lot of factors. And then we also can't forget about the huge over enrollment that a lot of schools experienced in that 2020-2021 cycle. And some schools are still really battling that over enrollment and therefore having to admit fewer students in the last two seasons.
Yeah, and thank you, Sarah. You know, one of the questions, a question came in about is how much of this is related to COVID. There's a good portion, a lot of this is because of COVID, but it's the things that happen because of COVID. And the most obvious is test optional. Test optional opened the doors for a lot of people. It also increased the numbers of applications really across the board. Admissions professionals who are enrollment managers really understandably, I suppose, missed the mark on what was going to happen, especially in that first post-pandemic year after the class of 2020. We saw, as Sarah just said, over enrollment pretty much across the board. And at a certain point, you know, it has to reconcile. You can't keep admitting hundreds of additional students and expect to have the space and the resources and be able to provide the same experience for your students. And so last year in particular, the class of 2021, they really found that that was the class that kind of paid so far sort of the bigger price. And then we saw it again this year where it just compounded again, not so much because of over enrollment, you know, but because of additional compounding factors. But it's absolutely because of COVID, but more so because of dominoes that have kind of fallen and moved as a result of the pandemic. And, you know, places like Maryland, they would have seen an increase anyway, but, you know, remember that they also just joined the Common App. And so for them, there's that added extra piece. We would normally see a significant surge for when a school initially joins the Common Application. And so they kind of had multiple things going on: test optional, join the Common App, over enrolled. I mean, you can see how these numbers start looking the way that they have. A couple of sort of noteworthy tidbits from certain colleges. I think most people have heard about Tulane's numbers, and I'll share them just in case you didn't see the headlines. It just came out a couple of weeks ago or a few weeks ago that they admitted only 106 applicants in regular decision. They get over 40,000 applications, just for context, and they admitted 106 students in regular. So obviously, that makes people, first of all, if you like Tulane, that's your signal to apply early. Tulane offers 2 early decision rounds, ED1 and ED2. They also offer EA, non-binding, and they offer regular decisions. So you can see how many spaces are left once the ED rounds and EA round is over. Now, the numbers were a little bit fishy. If you kind of thought about them for a moment, it made it seem like the class was, you know, a few hundred kids strong based on the way that they presented it. What we do know right now is that 2/3 of the class was filled in early decision 1 and 2. An additional 25% was filled in EA, and then the remaining spots were filled in regular. We also know, and this is very interesting, that about 90, just under 100 ED students did not enroll. And so ED is binding, but about 100 students, fewer than 100, but about 100 students at Tulane did not enroll who applied ED. We don't have further information about what those students, what were the reasons, what was, you know, they haven't released that, but you can figure it out when you dig into the data a little bit more. And so like everything, digging a little further, you get some more information. But regardless, if you're interested in Tulane, you should be applying early, preferably ED, but certainly EA at the very, very least. Another notable thing from last year is at Boston College. So Boston College saw a 35% increase in the number of applications. Almost all of those applications came in during their ED round, but they were very intentional and they didn't want to have essentially no spots, a la Tulane, in regular. And so they were taking very small numbers based on previous years to make sure that they had space in ED2 and to make sure that they had space in regular to actually take students. So they had a 35% increase in applications, almost all in ED. Some of those people got bumped in, certainly deferred into the regular round. And they made 900 fewer offers. And that is just astounding for a school of that size, or just almost any size, but a 35% increase in applications and 900 fewer offers. And certainly students who applied to BC last year felt that in the results. Another place worth mentioning is USC, University of Southern California. They actually had a 3% decrease in applications, but they took 7% fewer students. And so again, a pretty significant, when you're thinking about the sizes of these applicant pools, a pretty significant number of students who would have gotten in, or number of students who would have gotten in who didn't make the cut this year. One of the other, I would say, biggest news stories this year was Northeastern announcing a 6.7% admit rate. They didn't go to the wait list for their Boston campus. They did make a few offers at their through their NUN program, but Northeastern coming out with a 6.7% admit rate. For the parents who are listening to this webinar, I know people's eyes just bulged, and you're looking at each other like, is that right? Yes, I said 6.7% at Northeastern. Now, Northeastern has no supplemental essays, and while we love that, that makes it a very attractive school. They also offer 2 rounds of ED, but they offer EA, non-binding. People love that too. There are a lot of reasons why Northeastern ends up on people's lists, but the numbers now reflect that. So you have places like Northeastern, which I think is one of the starkest examples for our families when we talk about it, just how much things have changed since when people who applied, like when I applied, people who have kids generally who are high school age applying to college, Northeastern is like a prime example. And we'll talk later in the webinar and show you some numbers that I think will give more eyes a reason to bulge when we look at what things were like when you applied for the parents on this webinar, and what it looks like now when your kids are applying. And then finally, another really, really significant report is out of BU. So last year, BU had an 18% admit rate. It only went down to 16%, which when you look at how things have changed in the last year, actually doesn't seem so terrible, but they had over-enrolled by 800 students after the pandemic last year. So they had 800 too many students, and they took 3,000 fewer students this year and still over-enrolled by 550 students. So they over-enrolled by 800 last year. They over-enrolled just now at 550, even with taking 3,000 fewer students. So for those of you who are interested in BU, expect the belt to tighten even tighter this year. And BU has been upfront and said, listen, we're trying to figure out why our yield is so high. Even when they've kind of pulled back and tried to be more conservative, it's really, really off. And if you can think about it, they need beds for these students. They need class space. Like they need professors can't teach, 5 classes, 6 classes. They need advisors. They need spaces at the health services. They need career advising. So this is a much bigger issue, and people are there for approximately 4 years. So this is also not sort of single year issues. They really take about 3 or so years to sort of cycle through. And so these are important things if these are schools that you're interested in. There are other examples, but we just wanted to pull out a few in particular that might be worth mentioning. Now what I'd like to share a little bit is about, we're going to look at the Ivies because everyone's obsessed with these 8 schools and the data is so easily available and it's just fun to look at. But this grid that we're showing, this is where parents, you can start looking a little bit more closely about what it was like around the time that you applied and what it's like now for your kids. So you'll see here, what we did is we did 1992. So this is for 1992 means people who graduated from college in the class of 1996. And then 2012, those were students who were in high school, high school seniors in 2012. So college graduation class of 2016. And then here, this year's class of 2022 in high school, class of 2026 in college. And you can see here, we've got application numbers and we've got admit rates. Let's even forget about the kind of interim point in 2012. I highlighted here just sort of the bigger sort of gap between when you applied-ish and when your kids are applying. And you can see here, if we just start with Brown, you've got an admit rate that goes down from 23% to 5%. And you've got about 4 times as many applications. So not only are we plummeting from 23% down to 5%, you're doing it with almost 51,000 applications, a 5% admit rate, as opposed to a 23% admit rate from just over 12,000 applications. And so again, you've got kind of compounding factors making it that much more competitive as students are applying. You can see here, Columbia goes from 28% to 3.73%, and it's almost tenfold in the number of applications, which again is just astounding when you think about it. You can read here and see, I'm not going to go through each one, but pretty much in every single instance, you've got, multiple, you've got a significant admit rate cut, and then you've also just have a significant increase and an exponential increase in the number of applications. And so we always talk with parents before we start talking about particular schools. We'll say, listen, you really need to reorient yourself a little bit. And people that are talking to us generally know, they come in knowing that things have changed. It's tough. We know it's so hard. We've heard from people, but I think it's so important to see this so you can really see what the difference was from around the time when you applied to now. And now our next slide is going to really make you say, are you sure that this is correct? Here we have admit rates from 1992. So again, college class of 1996. This is right around when I applied. I applied in 92 to 93. And you can see here, so I've put the Ivies in order and by lowest admit rate. And actually, we just did it to the whole number, but Princeton was 15.8, Harvard was 16, but we just went to whole numbers here. So you can see here that in 1992, when parents who are watching applied, the admit rate at Princeton was 16%. That is the admit rate today at both Boston College and Boston University. Harvard also. Now, one thing I want to say, because it's very easy to take from this, oh my God, BU is the Harvard of now, that would be being overly simplistic. Just because 2 schools have the same admit rate doesn't necessarily mean that their, averages are the same or whatever. But we'll get to that too in a little bit, and you'll see that they actually are even higher. But again, I think it's helpful so you can see that what the admit rate at Yale is today's admit rate at FSU. The ones with the asterisks are plus or minus 1%, because I got to tell you, it was very hard to find schools currently that had admit rates, over 20%, certainly as you got into even mid 20%, that would be schools that you heard of. I went through things that were like top 50, and we still were not anywhere near Penn's 39% admit rate in 1992. So it was really, really hard. Actually, I wanted to try to get it exact, but I feel like plus or minus 1% is good enough. But you can see Brown was at 23%. That's the current rate at Villanova. Dartmouth and Macalester, for those of you who might not be familiar, Macalester is a fantastic small liberal arts college in Minnesota, in one of the coolest college towns. Columbia's 28% admit rate is Lafayette's rate at this time. Cornell and Trinity College, which is the one in Connecticut. There's also a Trinity University in Texas, and Penn and Union College. And I was actually deciding whether or not to put Union or American University. American University was actually a 38% admit rate comparably. So it's easier percentage, admit rate wise to get into American in 2022 than it was to get into Penn in 1992. So again, I just think for parents in particular, this is really, really helpful. And remember, as I pointed out in the prior slide, these are admit rates that have plummeted, but also the number of applications has increased exponentially. So you've got these lower admit rates from a much larger pool, and a more competitive pool overall, because as you know, kids today, and now I sound old, but kids today are much more prepared. They're thinking about college in a way completely different than we had to when we were applying. And so they are more prepared. They're doing more. None of that is an illusion. It's true. And so it's more competitive, these pools as well.
Great. And now as we talk about admit rates and application numbers, it's important to also talk about strategy and early decision and early action and regular decision. And so this chart here shows the numbers of, or the admit rates for early decision versus regular decision this last year at some of the most selective schools. So you can see that some schools use early decision in a much bigger way than other schools. So for example, Emory or BC and Duke have pretty high ED admit rates, all things considered. But make no mistake, while ED may be easier to be admitted, it is by no means easy to get in. And so it's very important to be strategic about where to use your early decision blue chip. So on this next chart, you'll see the percentage of the class filled between early decision, early action, and regular decision at a variety of schools. And so you'll see the red with Tulane. That's because this is the only school that offers an early action option. But you can see that there's a very, very, very small percent at the top of Tulane that was filled in regular decision. And while many of these schools look like they're filling their class approximately 50-50 between regular decision and early decision, it's important to think about who is in that, that regular decision pool after early decision. And it's also important to think about who's applying in that early decision pool. So for the most part, all pre-approved athletes are in that early decision mix. A lot of special interest groups are in that early decision mix. So while it may look like it's easier to get in that ED cycle, it's not quite as easy as some of the numbers may lead you to believe. There's also, early decision 2 at many schools, which is a great option for students if they're not admitted into the early decision 1 school. But typically that early decision 2 admit rate isn't anywhere close to that admit rate in ED1, partially because, and this is true for regular decision as well, but the vast majority of people applying in ED2 or RD at the most selective schools that offer that round are students who very well could have been admissible at some of the most selective schools. And so that pool in regular decision or in early decision 2, if a school offers it, is actually so much stronger than some people realize. And the vast majority of students are also applying in regular decision. So it's a huge pool, and colleges can really fill the remaining of the class how they want to. They have a lot of flexibility for who they're admitting and who they're not admitting in the regular decision pool. And this is all pretty much just to say that it's important to be strategic of where you're applying, when you're applying, and to really use your blue chip wisely. And looking at the data, it can be helpful in determining where you think you may want to apply early decision or potentially early decision 2. What are the risks involved? Where would you be happy if your early decision 1 option doesn't work out? And what are the next steps? So I think just being really strategic with how you're applying and where you're applying is super important moving forward when you're considering what colleges to apply to.
Sarah, can I add something just to piggyback on what you've said? Is like Sarah said, you can see that there's clearly an advantage in ED. If that's period, there's an advantage. It's not as significant as you think, but ED will pretty much always be your best bet. But I just want to underscore what Sarah said, that just because it's your easiest chance at any particular school doesn't mean it's the one you should do. It may be, but it may be your best chance at getting into Vanderbilt, but you might have essentially no chance at really getting into Vanderbilt in early. And so even though it's your best chance, it's not necessarily a good use of your strategic chip. And so thinking about that is really, really important. And also, like Sarah said, is not only do you have a much larger applicant pool, you've got a ton of people who were deferred in early who are exceptional, like beyond exceptional. And again, just to underscore a point that Sarah made, let's say they filled about 50% of the class in ED or ED1, ED2, whatever. Then they go into regular. You've got this bigger pool. You've got powerhouse after powerhouse kid that didn't make it through in the early rounds who are in here, plus, everyone else. They've got a good portion of their class spoken for. Now they know, okay, we've got X amount of people from here. We've got X amount of people from here. We've got these groups represented. We have not enough people in this group represented. They also have to reconcile the class. And this is a really important part of admissions, and anybody who's been on the other side, like Sarah and I have, know what the reconciliation process is in pulling together the class before regular decision notifications are released. And so regular decision is not just about filling spaces. It's about very intentionally filling particular spaces based on what the class looks like that's already set. And so this really further impacts the way that regular decision ends up playing out. So it's not, like Sarah said, just a sort of 50-50 kind of thing. Regular decision is significantly harder. Pretty much, I can't think of an exception, honestly, across the board when ED is an option. And, while we want to make the point that it's not as strong as you think, it absolutely is a significant strategic advantage. Again, whether or not a particular school is worth doing ED for you is a whole other story, but just something to keep in mind. Okay. Are you, Sarah, are you
continuing? Oh yeah, no, I'm all set. We can move on. Thank you.
Okay. I didn't know if you had more. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to move from that to testing. And we're going to talk about, again, another question that comes up time after time is test optional really test optional? The first thing that we're going to talk about, because I think it's just helpful, is to have a sense of the lay of the land in terms of how many colleges or what percentage of colleges today are actually test optional. And we do have a slide for that. And you can see here, you've got well over 80% of colleges currently that are test optional, whether temporarily or permanent, most temporarily, as you can see. So one of the, or most, actually, sorry, it's most that are permanent, but a lot of those were from before, I should say, a lot of those were from before the pandemic. There's been a relatively small number that have announced that their current test optional policies that were implemented purely because of the pandemic are permanent. Some have made an announcement, but not all. Not many, but we've got about 80+% of schools that are test optional. It was literally essentially a flip of that before the pandemic, just to give you a sense. I think it was something between about 15 and 20% pre-pandemic of schools that were test optional. Now, another question that comes up often is, do we think that test optional is here to stay? I think the very easy, quick, short answer is yes, it is. It's unlikely that it's just gonna get completely pulled back. You will see some schools pull back, and we've started to see that, but in very small numbers. We have some schools that are in the midst of sort of 2, 3, and 5 year pilot programs. And so we'll see what happens, but I would say, yes, expect for it to hang around. But again, it may be that test optional is test optional and it's here to stay, but the extent to which it applies to you, or that it's a good strategic move on your part to not submit scores, is another story. And we have some data actually, and this data, by the way, I should mention, was collected by Compass Prep, and they looked at over 400 colleges, as you can see here, to get a sense of the lay of the land. If we look more closely at schools in particular and say, okay, is there an advantage or not between submitters and non-submitters? In this graph that you're looking at here, you can see that generally speaking, the answer is yes, just how significantly so. And so just to give you a sense what you're looking at here, the blue versus the orange is just, the blue is 2021 and orange is 2022. So data wasn't available always for the most recent year. And so as things have been updated, they put in, this is also a Compass graph that they updated with the current year information. But you can see at some of these schools, I mean, look at Emory, you're more than twice as likely to get in with SAT scores or ACT scores. And you can see the same thing at Amherst, Notre Dame, Davidson, Emory, Colgate, Georgia Tech, Georgia Tech now went back, by the way, they're going back because they're part of the state system in Georgia to requiring scores. Looking at Emory ED2 in particular, it gets to almost 3. Same thing at Boston College. And so you can really see at some of these schools, it's an extraordinarily big advantage. It's an extraordinary advantage. And you see that still at UVA, and other places. And when you look even on the other end of things at Northeastern, where it's 50-50, again, just because that's the case, we don't know demographically what submitters versus non-submitters look like. We're just not sure. And so one thing that we know from our experience with students, the actual experience we have guiding students through the process, is that we can say really, I think quite confidently that there's an advantage, or certainly that there could be a disadvantage. Maybe that's a better way to say it. There could certainly be a disadvantage when you don't submit scores. And that wouldn't be true for everybody. Again, you've got to think about what part of the applicant pool you represent. You have to think about all the different factors. But test optional, I really would find it hard to say that it's test optional equally for all applicants. And so these numbers, I think, are very, very helpful, especially when you can see how significant the advantage can be. And these, again, are just across the applicant pool. This is not specific to any demographic. But some of these numbers would become even stronger and even more significant if we looked more closely. And the truth is the best data we could ever have is if colleges not just said we have this many submitters or this many non-submitters, but if they did break it down, public versus private school, urban versus rural, athlete, non-athlete, legacy, non-legacy, give us like some more broken down information. That's never coming, but we certainly gather our data on our end and have thankfully seen enough students over time, even in these last couple of years, go through the process to see exactly how it plays out. So I think that thanks to Compass for putting this together, but you can really see that test optional is test optional. You can get in without scores, but there sure is an advantage to submitting them and submitting strong scores, which brings us to our next slide, where you can, again, another eye-bulging moment for mom and dad who are watching. So for those of you who, this isn't a look back for 30 years ago, but you can just see, this is just pre-post pandemic, by the way. The left is SAT scores, the right is ACT scores. We grabbed the mid 50th percentile in fall 2020. So this is pre-pandemic, the students who applied right before the onset of the pandemic. And then this fall's group, what the ranges were. And I mean, if you look at the SATs, let's just start there. And this is just a small sampling of schools, but they're representative more broadly for sure. You can see in some instances more than 100 point increases on the lower end and even on the higher end too. And so when you see how much of a shift, this is not since, again, parents have applied and now their kids are applying, this is in 2 years. So back to that question that came in about, is some of this due to the pandemic? Yes. Right. This is a direct result of test optional, right? So colleges go test optional. My scores aren't at whatever towards the top of whatever, let's say that fall 2020 range is. I'm not in the high 1400s at BC. I'm not going to submit it now. I actually can be reviewed and have a chance of getting in. And what do you know? The kids who are actually submitting scores, now you've got an upper end of 1540. It's the case now, as it was pre-pandemic, that when you see a mid 50% range, that if you're on the low end of the mid 50%, you'd be wise to think twice about sending those scores. It doesn't mean you have to be at the tippy top, but you should be closer to that than the bottom end of the range. And so, you can really see just what a dramatic shift there's been in terms of what's considered a good score. This is another question that Sarah and I and the other counselors at Expert Admissions get all the time, which is, what's a good score? Well, it depends where you're applying, and you might be surprised at the schools even that you're applying to, what a competitive score would be post onset of the pandemic. So, and if you look at the ACT scores, we've got a narrower range, 1 to 36 on ACT, but you can even see that it's just clustering, towards the top. 36 being a perfect score on the ACT for those who don't know. And so these differences just in 2 years, purely because of test optional, essentially, it also makes it tougher, right? So if you had great scores like on the old version, old meaning, by the way, 2020, and now it's 2022, and you don't have that upper range, you may need to decide to apply test optional to a certain school, which kind of forces you into a pool again of non-submitters where that may work against you. So it puts a lot of pressure on the tests, actually, which is, I think, a certainly unintended consequence of test optional, but one that we certainly are seeing in our work, and you can see it here just in the numbers as they play out. But I don't think people are thinking, if my score isn't, around approaching 1,500, I shouldn't send it to Villanova. But when you look at these numbers, you need to think about that and think twice about it. So I think that this is certainly a helpful thing. Again, just not necessarily a longer term comparison, but one simply just pre and post pandemic.
Yeah, I always look at these numbers, Bari, and my jaw just drops looking at them every time, because it really is astonishing. I mean, thinking of Vanderbilt, essentially their scores are perfect. So if you don't have a perfect score, or just within 1 point of a perfect score in the ACT, it's tough to know if to submit them or not. But the last thing I think we want to
sorry, Sarah, like you were saying, it's a good point. When you see a spread of 34 to 36, that doesn't mean the 34 is worth sending, and so it really is, like Sarah was saying, you've got this tiny little range. At 35, it is perfect, essentially. And so it really is sort of like either they're perfect and you send them, or they're not, and you really think twice. I think for people of a 34, we're not saying don't ever send a 34. There certainly may be some instances where you were, but whereas the 35 and the 36 you would of course send, you actually would think twice. Does it make sense to send the 34 or not? And that's just crazy, actually, that's where it's at.
Yeah, crazy. Okay, so I think the last thing we want to talk about tonight is, well, not the last thing we want to talk about tonight, the last thing we want to talk about when we look backwards before we start talking about moving forwards is the waitlist. And traditionally, there isn't a ton of movement on waitlist. Generally speaking, that waitlists don't really move a whole lot. There may be a little bit in any given year, and it's really hard to know what schools may or may not go to the waitlist. And like we said, schools are still battling that over enrollment. There are some schools who will purposefully go to the waitlist every year. There's a few reasons for that. One being optics. They say if we're going to have a waitlist, we should use the waitlist. Why put people on a waitlist if we're just going to leave them there hanging on and having this hope that we never will ever, admit them or take them off of that waitlist? So there's that optics reason. And also colleges have a whole lot of control over who they take off of that waitlist in order to really finalize building their incoming class. Colleges are very strategic about who they're taking. They can make very intentional movements on that wait list. And again, it also plays a part into that yield. And they know that if they're taking that student off the wait list, they're going to go, not every school, but many schools will go through what they need to, for the most part, feel very comfortable that when they admit that student off the wait list, they will be enrolling. And so that's just another person that they can count in their overall yield number, which, as we've learned, is a really, really important number to a lot of different colleges.
So Sarah, just sorry to interrupt, is like what Sarah's really saying is that like colleges, when it comes to wait lists, will call people and say, if we admit you off the wait list, will you come? And then if you say, I'm not sure, or no, then they're not going to admit, they won't give you the waitlist offer. And if you say, oh, yes, absolutely, they'll say, okay, we'll send you the offer. So like, to be more specific about what Sarah's referring to, I mean, they literally will call, check to see what your answer is before giving you the offer and letting you make the decision, because they are so protective of the yield.
Yeah. And they may not even be, they'll be direct sometimes, but sometimes they'll be a little bit less direct too, and say like, are you still interested? And unless you say a resounding yes, of course, they may then go to the next person on the list. So they are, like Bari said, very intentional, and they know who they're taking, and they're counting on that number. So we just want to talk a little bit about who or what schools actually went to the wait list this year. So I have a few. It's not fully comprehensive, but just to give you an idea of some schools that did go to the wait list this year: Penn, Smith, Colby, WashU, Emory, Wesleyan, Virginia Tech, Maryland, Vassar, McGill in Canada and Montreal, Wake Forest, Lehigh, NYU, Northwestern. As Bari had mentioned earlier, Northeastern did go, but not for their Boston campus, only for their NUIN program. And then some of the UC schools, so UC Santa Barbara, UCLA, San Diego, Irvine, Cornell went to their wait list, Dartmouth, and Vanderbilt. And some schools that are notable that didn't go were, of course, BU, since they over-enrolled by such a significant amount again this year, Columbia, George Washington, and also Kenyon. So it's an interesting group of schools that both went and that didn't go.
And Kenyon was actually trying to pay people to not come this fall and to defer. And last year, you had, because of over-enrollment, or trying to pay people $5,000 to not live on campus so that they could open up space. So, I mean, colleges are scrambling with this over enrollment stuff. And like Sarah said, by no means are the lists comprehensive. This is really based on our students and some colleague students where we have firsthand information that students were taken from wait lists. Now, the good news is that there's been a little bit of movement on the wait list. But what we also know is, as you can see, the numbers still are so tight. But the hope is that there is some movement. There's usually, as Sarah said, not a lot, but we're happy to see some movement back from some of these schools. Sarah talked earlier about initially when we started about looking back. I'm going to talk briefly just about looking forward. Of course, we've given you a lot of information and a lot of data, and you want to know, what does that mean for my kid, or what does that mean for me? And what do we think is going to happen going forward? I mean, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen going forward. That's certainly one lesson of the pandemic amongst many. But like I said earlier, we do expect test optional to basically stick around. We do have some colleges that have dialed back. MIT is the most notable. It made big headlines earlier in the spring when they announced that they were going to require testing once again. The state system of Georgia, of which Georgia Tech is part of, I mentioned earlier, they're back to requiring tests. The Florida state system never stopped requiring tests, but we're starting to see a little bit of a return. I don't anticipate that there's going to be a huge number of schools that roll back. I think, again, you just have to be strategic and understand how each school uses test optional and where you fit in that. And make the decisions appropriately. Another thing that certainly I feel like, this should not be a surprise is legacy is definitely on the radar in terms of, certainly at the very least, we already have seen it have less of an effect and less of an impact, and just being on the chopping block in general. So Amherst made a big announcement in the past year about doing away with legacy. We know that the UCs have done away with it. Johns Hopkins has been away with it for a few years now, maybe more. Don't be surprised if there are more announcements that come out in the coming years with colleges making the announcement of the end of those programs. Some of you may have seen just this past week, there was an article about legacy in the New York Times. And when I always say, when a story like this hits the New York Times, unless it's literally like breaking news, like Varsity Blues, it's already an old story. So if the New York Times is writing about it, that this is definitely like out there, and sort of the rumblings have gotten louder, so to speak. So keep an eye out for that. And then just for those of you, there are changes every year in admissions, pandemic or no pandemic. Colleges make some adjustments and changes based on a lot of different things. And some notable things that we think are important to mention, USC, University of Southern California, they were a priority deadline and really a single deadline. They added early action. They moved to early action for next year. Like, get ready. Like, that is a school that has like skyrocketed in terms of popularity and plummeted in terms of admit rate. And when they move to EA, which is non-binding, it's going to get so much more competitive this year. I mean, I'll say it now, but listen to our webinar in the spring, and I'll be saying, oh my God, can you believe USC went from this to this? University of Texas, UT Austin joined the Common App. Giddy up for that, literally and figuratively. Those numbers are going to skyrocket as well. Their Apply Texas application, which they've used up to now, they're still using it, by the way, but it was very, very different and much more cumbersome than the Common App. And so them joining the Common App is a huge change. We saw it at Maryland. We saw it back when Wisconsin joined. We'll see it now at UT. We mentioned returning to the requiring of tests with some public and private schools. I think that's a smaller piece that's going to happen in the near future. University of Vermont, UVM, which has seen one of the most significant increases, as Sarah mentioned earlier in the webinar, they added early action. They actually used to have early action. They got rid of it. Now it's back. But that's going to be a big deal as well, especially as the state system, places like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford that have restrictive early action, but allow you to apply early action to public schools, but not private schools. So you'll be able to apply to Michigan and UVA and UNC and now UVM early action, while you also apply to, let's say, Princeton early action, but you're not going to be able to apply to USC or University of Chicago or MIT because those are private institutions. So this opens up some other options. We know that Penn is adding a third supplemental essay. They've had 2 essays for a really long time. They're adding a third one. So if that's on your list, you'll see it when the Common App reopens on August 1. You'll be seeing a new essay there. And for students who are interested in computer science, UIUC, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, one of the top CS programs in the country, they made an announcement after staggering increases in applications that you can no longer transfer into CS once you're there. The only entry point for CS students will be out of high school as first-year students, and that's a really big deal for those students who are high achieving and interested in CS, a really big change. So, and then the last thing is we've been talking about for a bit is just the digital SAT for those who are currently 10th graders in the class of 2025. The digital SAT is here. ACT is staying as it is for now. They're watching and waiting and seeing what happens. But in the near term, that's what we have looking forward. So just some things to note about this coming cycle for some particular schools and some broader trends that that we're seeing. So yeah, and like I said, we want to look forward. We also want to say, what can you do with the information that we've provided today? Because that's the most important. You've got all this background, all this information, but again, what does that mean for my kid, and how can I sort of take this and use it strategically as you move forward? And so in terms of building your list, it's really important, as Sarah mentioned earlier, that you're strategic and that it has a true breadth. I think if you noted one thing from some of these numbers that you saw, it's that you can't be cavalier about schools that you may think you're well above, because you are going to be surprised when you get the responses back. And so having a thicker cushion, sort of at what you might think is your bottom end would be wise, and being even extra strategic and early for, most importantly, your reaches that hopefully are in that sweet spot of just enough where ED might make the difference for you to get in, but where in regular you pretty much know you won't make the cut. Making sure that you pick really, really wisely, so that if there is a school that you like a whole lot, and you don't have to love it beyond, like, I sometimes feel like people think it has to be the best love affair that ever existed between a student and a college. And I don't think that has to be the case, but you do have to like it enough that you're willing to give up whatever other potential options you might have, and you have to feel good about if that was where you were going. You don't just apply ED because it's strategically better to apply ED if you're not happy with where you'll end up. But nonetheless, really, really, really being smart about what you choose for ED, so you can try to get that deal done, assuming that there's an ED school out there for you. And Sarah, if you want to add.
I think just to add on to that point, being smart about where you apply is for sure the data as well, right? Like the test scores, the application numbers, the acceptance rate, but also I think looking inward and where you're going to be happiest in terms of fit at the school. I think that because so many schools are test optional now, a lot of students think that they may have a chance at one of these really, low admit rate schools because they are test optional, where the other parts of the application just aren't quite there. And so instead of using that blue chip to one of these schools where maybe there's a small chance I'll get admitted, even if it may not be the best fit for the student, is just not the smartest move on the student's part. I think that students need, because they are casting a much wider net, I think that looking inward and really trying to figure out what school is the best fit for them, academically, socially, geographically, all things considered, is just really important when developing that list in terms of their reach schools, their target, and their likely schools, versus just applying to, all the name brand schools because they're not going to be submitting their testing along with their application.
And also the colleges are admitting based on fit at the end of the day. There's an initial academic review. Vast majority of people applying are going to pass the academic review. There's still going to be tens of thousands of extra people. So all the soft factors like fit, most importantly, and again, fit doesn't mean how much you think you fit. Fit has to do with whether or not not the college, the admissions office, how they perceive, their community, if they see you as a fit, again, which also has nothing to do with how well you might be able to do the work there. And that's where decisions are made. It's on these softer factors. How well do they think you fit? How compelling are you to them? And by the way, the truth is that smart really isn't compelling, certainly on its own. And they've got no shortage of smart kids. So it's really not going to make you stand out to show I'm extra smart or whatever. It's really, they'll figure out if you're smart enough for their school in 2 seconds when they look at your transcript, what level classes you took, what grade you earned, and if you submitted scores or not. And that's a pretty easy and quick, metric. But then comes the hard part of you have tens of thousands of kids who are great and who pass that academic review, and who you have to sift through and figure out who's compelling, who fits, who can bring this class together in all the different ways that we need different kinds of people and different kinds of interests represented. And so the softer things like fit, essays, recommendations, not what you do, but how you engage and how you communicate, all the extracurricular pieces, that's where it's all at. And so the irony is that the softer factors really rule ultimately when it comes to the actual decision making and the picking of individual students. Let me look. We have a bunch of questions, and we have just about 2 minutes left. But let me see if there's anything that we could answer kind of quickly. Questions about COVID and, kind of what explains the vast increase in the number of applications. And it's test optional primarily in the past 2 years. If you think about more over time, you've got, we're in the process of demographically moving in the other direction right now, but you've got more high school age students, you've got more high school age students applying to college. And the truth is that as college admissions has become more competitive, not surprisingly, as a luxury item, more people sort of clamor after it. And so unfortunately, the sort of focus on it and the obsession with it to some degree has also ramped up. And it's an unfortunate piece of it. And we always say that the public perception has to change, for a lot of this stuff to kind of shift. The colleges bear a tremendous amount of responsibility, but until people stop wanting to go to a certain place just because it has an admit rate of X, it's going to be hard to pull this back, quite frankly. And I wouldn't count on colleges becoming super transparent. And I think, honestly, even if Harvard came out and said, if you don't have X and X, don't bother applying, which they're never going to do because they do take technically a range. Even if you tell them no, if you tell someone no, they're still going to be like, well, you never know. I'm still going to try just so I can definitely get the no. And I've had students tell me that, when we know there's essentially no chance that it could work, even though we don't quite say it like that, they say, I know there isn't, but I just need the no. I need to just have it to know that I did it. And so, again, until the public consciousness changes, I think it's going to be hard. But, schools joining the Common App, introduction of new programs, whether it's data science and AI stuff and new science. I mean, there's all different kinds of things that go into it, but the absolutely test optional, particularly in the last couple of years, is really why all of this is happening. Is it too risky to send in a score that would have been in the range pre-pandemic, but is a little below now because of how these ranges are now skewed? Yes. That's easy. I love that question. Quick and easy. One word answer does it. Let's see. Some of these are just now, these are more specific to students, particular situations. And we're actually now at 8:30. So thank you so much to everybody for joining us. We hope that this was helpful, not only to kind of get a better handle on how things have changed since parents have applied, but also just in the last 2 years, what a seismic shift has happened in college admissions. And most importantly, we hope that we've given you some information and direction to help you move forward successfully. So best of luck to everybody. And thank you so, so much for joining us. And tune in next month when we'll be talking about college essays, main essays and supplements. We will have 2 admissions officers with us. One is confirmed now, one we're waiting on. The one who's confirmed is one of the Ivies. We're not going to tell you which one today, but stay tuned on our social channels and we'll be announcing it. And we hope you'll join us at the end of August for that. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, thank you.